Please consider supporting Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. You can learn more about them at bwunited.ca. They are always looking for donations and volunteers. So please, again, support Black Women United YEG for the protection and advancement of black women and girls in Alberta. Again, that website is bwunited.ca.
Hi, I'm Jed Bodwin, and I live in Wichita, Kansas. I am a Patreon supporter for Creative Control. I discovered Creative Control some years ago, I think maybe while looking for interviews with Tommy Stinson of The Replacements. And I stumbled across this conversation that Vish had with Tommy Stinson that was really insightful. Vish held his own. I think Tommy can be a little bit of a difficult interview at times. And it went really well, and it really got into some areas that I wasn't expecting. And I thought, gosh, I have to listen to more of this guy and his podcast. Yeah, sometimes I'm not necessarily a fan of the music or musicians that Vish will have on the show, but I always appreciate their creative process a little bit more. And more times than not, though, it does lead me to finding a new musical artist that I'm interested in, or to think a little bit differently about maybe some artists whose work I've overlooked. So, go ahead, and if you've been waiting at all to support Vish and Creative Control, now is probably the best time to do it. I know as a public radio employee here in Kansas, listener-supported broadcasting, whether it's podcasts or radio itself, really isn't a thing of the past. It's actually very much a thing of both the present and the future. So, yay Vish, yay Creative Control.
To make your flexible monthly donation to Creative Control, please visit patreon.com/Creative Control today.
As long as I stand to face the crowd, to know my name, to know its sound, it's good to be soft when they push you down. Oh God, turn me into flower.
Natalie Merring is a gifted and prolific musician, songwriter, and singer based in Los Angeles, California. After spending her formative years in Pennsylvania with her family in a deeply Christian household, Merring explored her love of music at school in the Pacific Northwest, playing in noisy bands, and eventually writing and recording music under variations of her current artistic name, Weyes Blood. Often categorized as making chamber pop, psychedelic folk, or soft rock, Merring continues to defy any simple signifiers with her thoughtfully written and ambitious-sounding new album. It's called And in the Darkness, Hearts Aglow. It's out on November 18th, 2022 via Sub Pop Records, and it prompted Natalie and I to have a good talk about her West Coast and East Coast lives, sports, and ping pong. I realize ping pong is a sport, but I wrote sports and ping pong, and I have to say that. Sports and ping pong. Her upbringing and relationship to God as a concept. Her interest in the tale of narcissists, consumer capitalism, and perspectives on social media and the internet generally. The pandemic and selfishness, how such things inform her new album, the influence of older siblings, how The Kids in the Hall and Scott Thompson in particular altered her forever, her unique sound, and much more. A part of the Entertainment One Network with the support of listeners like you who follow and subscribe to this podcast and spread the word about it and make flexible monthly donations at patreon.com/Creative Control, which is the primary source of revenue for all the work that goes into making this podcast. Thanks for supporting the show at patreon.com/Creative Control, with additional support from Blackbird Music, a wonderful record store with locations in Edmonton and Calgary, Alberta, and the friendliest staff ever who will happily help you find the things you're looking for. Say you want to order the brand new Weyes Blood record, And in the Darkness, Hearts Aglow. That's what it's called. You go over to blackbird.ca, type it in, try to order it. I'm sure you can. That's what you do. Go to blackbird.ca for more info about how to do that. Plus, in-kind support from Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee in Guelph, Ontario, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario. This is episode 733 of Creative Control, featuring the brilliant Natalie Mering of Weyes Blood, with your host, me, Vish Khanna. Hi, Natalie. How's it going?
It's going really great, Vish.
Nice to have you on the show. I'm a fan of yours. It's lovely to have you on the show and talk about this great new record of yours. First of all, where in the world are you today?
I'm in Los Angeles.
Oh, nice. Now you are a California person. Is that fair?
Yeah, I live in California, and I was born here.
Now, some people they move. You decided not to move. You're ensconced. Is it fair to say you're ensconced? Is that too severe a word? Do you feel ensconced?
Well, I'll be honest. I moved when I was 11 to the East Coast, and I had a long phase out there, so I'm not fully ensconced. I definitely did my journey elsewhere, but I came back eventually because I did kind of want to reconcile with my childhood and kind of this place that I'm technically from, because all my relatives and grandparents and, their parents are from here too. I think I'm like 6th generation Californian or something, which is very rare and random.
Yeah. Well,
so very pioneer.
Historically, or at least in literature and films, people migrate to California from elsewhere. That seems to be a trend. They head west. What drew you east for even that brief period?
My dad got a job that he took.
Oh,
simple as that.
Simple as that. You almost had no agency in the move. Is that what you're kind of saying?
No, I was 11 years old, so I was just going with the flow.
I see. And whereabouts did you reside?
In Doylestown, Pennsylvania. It's like kind of northwest of Philadelphia.
Pennsylvania.
Northeast, actually.
Been in the news a lot for the politics as we're speaking. Were you observing that? What did you make of the result?
I felt maybe that I should have registered to vote out there and kept my Pennsylvania identity, but I'm a Californian now, so.
Well, that's great. Did you enjoy your time in Pennsylvania? Like you say you were there for a time, 11 years old, I think is what you said. And then how long were you actually there?
It was kind of a culture shock. I was there until I was like 19. And then I kind of moved around all over the East Coast, but yeah, it was very different from Southern California. And at first I was pretty fascinated, that I got to ride the bus and I saw falling snow for the first time. And there are all these really weird classic things about the East Coast that we didn't really have in Los Angeles, but it was so culturally different that I think it kind of set the tone for me to become a weirdo, because I just started playing guitar and just going deep into my own zone. Versus I wasn't, joining the field hockey team or, like getting really East Coast about it. I was kind of like,
Do you feel that sports are an East Coast concern, or do you have a predilection for sports if you're on the East Coast as opposed to laid back California?
I think there's just different sports. I think in California, it's like soccer and, maybe surfing or, tennis or something. But I feel like the East Coast was very much like field hockey, lacrosse, and like it was different. Grittier
team sports, in a sense. I mean, some of the California sports you described, or alluded to, I should say, fairly individual in their own ways. You have a little team sometimes. You're a tennis player, you're pretty much on your own. I don't remember what else you said. But maybe there's some to it. That is, everyone's galvanized. Are you an athletic person, or do you have an affinity for sports at all?
I have a badminton situation in my yard. I like some racket sports, but I'm not good. and I don't watch avidly.
No.
I'll watch some basketball sometimes. I think I'm more like, I don't want to be somebody that hates sports, because I can see that there's something, there's some kind of sport charisma that can cross over, athletic charisma that can cross over with, any kind of art. Even though it's so different, I do think that it can transcend its medium. But I don't have a super athletic, vibe.
No. Well, I mean, I don't know about the vibe per se, but sometimes people have little not hidden, but like things they don't, what happened recently on that show, Office Hours Live, with your friend Tim Heidecker, many months ago now. I guess it has been a few months, but they had members of Pavement, Stephen Malcolmus, and I believe it was my friend Bob Nastanovich as well. They did a doubles match against Tim Heidecker, and I want to say it was Doug. And anyway, for some people, I think those of us who follow Pavement, do you know that band Pavement very well? Do you know that band?
Definitely, yeah.
Yeah. So I've been a lifelong Pavement fan. I mean, for most of my life, I should say. So I knew they had a predilection for competition among other bands, and they liked sports, watching them, talking about them sometimes. But it was fascinating to actually watch members of Pavement engage in tennis and discover that Malcolmus is good. I think some of us were like, yeah, that makes sense. He's like some sort of weird savant. Anyway,
he'd be good at tennis.
Yeah,
for
probably.
sure.
If anyone's going to be good at tennis and Pavement, you'd put your money on Malcolmus. So that's what I was thinking the whole time. Anyway, what I'm getting at is you might have like things you do on your own, card games, sports, like competition things. That's all I'm getting at. Do you have anything like that?
A little competitive edge.
Yeah.
For sure. I mean, ping pong. I can beat people at ping pong. I get really excited about that. I am competitive for sure, but I also I'm kind of a sore loser. I like games. I like charades and stuff that's like more brainy.
Yes.
And I would say that ping pong is kind of brainy. You don't have to use your body that much. So
absolutely, I loved ping pong. I objected. I got a ping pong table for my birthday from my parents, and I objected. I thought that was, I didn't ask for it, They were always giving me things that I didn't ask for, and I was an ungrateful gift getter. I don't know if you can relate to that in any way. When they didn't, it's like, you don't even know me. That's how I felt as a kid.
Yeah, no, my mom kept trying to make me more basic, and she would get me really girly basic stuff for Christmas, and it would always be this big debacle, and eventually I would just give it to her. And at a certain point, I was like, are you buying stuff for yourself?
I think my son is in piano lessons, which I was never allowed to have. They really discouraged my interest in music. And then you do worry. I do. Sorry, I shouldn't say you. Parents, I am self-aware enough to be like, am I just trying to give my kids the childhood I wish I had? Like, I worry about that sometimes myself. And it sounds like your mother had maybe a bit of, like when you say she was just getting stuff she wanted, there's probably a little like, I wish I'd had this when I was a kid. Do you think that was there?
Yeah, I think she probably thought I was pretty ungrateful.
No, but I mean do you think she was trying to create a little version of herself with you and give her the things she regretted not having? Give you
of course. Yeah. Of
that's
course,
what
yeah.
That
Definitely.
That's the tangled web of parenting. It's like you're trying to be in the moment and present, but your whole history is staring at you because they're a little reflection. Sorry, I assume you don't. Do you have children?
I do not.
Yeah, I didn't mean to put my whole parent trap onto you. This is none of your concern.
No, I'm really good at imagining how other people might feel, so I can imagine that's that's really difficult, and it's also hard because the pendulum always swings. It's like,
yeah,
I think children have that tendency because I was raised relatively conservative, but my friends that were raised in super lefty liberal households, sometimes they kind of swing. Yeah, everybody just kind of flip-flops.
Yeah, you reject. I think I have found that I spent a good chunk of my teens and 20s and some of my 30s trying to purposefully reject a lot of the things my parents put on me. But now that I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, this is kind of why they did some of that stuff. I'm not saying I'm becoming them, but I'm starting to relate more to them as I get older and as I'm a parent now. I'm sure you've talked to people who can relate to that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting that you invoked religion, because I thought of a song on this beautiful new album of yours. Congratulations, I should say right off the... It's too late for this to be right off the top, but congratulations on this brilliant new record. I hope you're pleased with it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
It's wonderful. You were talking about your religious upbringing, and I couldn't help but think of this song, God Turned Me Into a Flower, because that and songs like, I think it doesn't, not the one preceding it, here it is, Children of the Empire. I feel like you're actually reflecting a little bit about the current state of affairs a lot on this record, and how we relate to one another, and maybe why we relate to one another. But I hear a lot of autobiography, I don't know you well enough to know that is autobiography, but I get the sense that this is a particularly autobiographical batch of songs about how you're relating to the world and reflecting upon your experiences. Is that a fair assessment of where these songs are coming from?
Definitely. I think that I went really intimate and kind of vulnerable on this record. The lockdown kind of inspired a more deep dive into, intimacy and the relationship between big macro things happening and kind of the microcosmic effect they have.
Yeah. You mentioned this conservative and I think religious background or upbringing that you had. Is that a fair way of characterizing it?
Yeah.
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 So when you invoke God, knowing what I know of you, I wonder what it means to you to invoke the figure of God. And just so people understand, there's this song called God Turned Me Into a Flower. And if it's okay with you, Natalie, I want to just recite the first verse into what is ostensibly the chorus. Is that permissible for you, to you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so for people following along at home, as long as I stand to face the crowd, to know my name, to know its sound, it's good to be soft when they push you down. Oh God, turn me into a flower. Now, as we're speaking, there are a lot of artists who are being more outspoken about what it means to be a performing artist right now. The gruel of it, the health and safety aspects of being a touring musician. And this is my interpretation. That some of these songs seem to me to be you conveying feelings about what it means to exist in this socially mediated world, but also as a musician, as someone who's trying to make a go of it. Is any of that present in what I just read?
Definitely, yeah. And it was personal, but I also kind of hoped that most people could relate to it because we've all had to become so public. Like no matter what your vocation is or what you're doing, I think a lot of people feel pressure to promote themselves on social media. And, there's definitely industries where you don't have to do that as much, but it just kind of feels like it's everything is kind of going in that direction.
Yeah.
I mean, even my parents have made a TikTok video.
Well, this is
so I just think that it's about me, but I would hope also that people do feel like, a lot of people feel like they're kind of facing a crowd now by just having to be so public.
Yeah, so when I read the verse and when I listened to you sing it, I can't help but picture a singer on stage. But I think you're astutely suggesting everyone feels like they're on a stage right now, and they don't know maybe who they are or who they're supposed to be. Later on in the same song, the closing verse is, you see the reflection and you want it more than the truth. You yearn to be that thing you could never get to because the person on the other side has always just been you. That to me read as like the social media aspect. And then again, oh God, turn me into a flower. So I hope this isn't too muddled. I think what I just read is an extension of what you just said. I wonder if you can expand upon what you're trying to get at with this stuff in terms of how we're currently living and processing things. But again, this notion of, oh God, turn me into a flower coming from you, I can't help but think about that a lot given where you've come from and I don't even know how that relates to the verses on some level. And I hope I'm not being too dogmatic or heavy-handed with this stuff, but can you speak to these things a little bit? Yeah.
So, I mean, the song is really actually based on the myth of Narcissus. Mm-hmm. I read The Culture of Narcissism by Charles Losh, and I just really felt that narcissism is kind of a huge part of the culture. And it's not narcissism like we traditionally think about it, like people just being obsessed with themselves.
Yeah.
the real story of Narcissus was that he became obsessed with a reflection that he didn't even realize was himself.
Mm-hmm.
So he thought it was something else. And I think that's very symbolic for kind of the aspirationalism and the kind of frontier seeking that our culture has, where we think, oh, it's just a matter of technology that's going to be able to conquer nature, or just like if I only had what that other person had, or if I only have this relationship, or if I only had this job, or if my face only looked this way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we're kind of constantly seeking some kind of transcendence from ourselves, when in reality, it's like we can never conquer nature unless we conquer ourselves, and we could never be happy in a relationship unless we loved ourselves. You know, it's very like, unfortunately cliche, but very true. That I think, you know, a lot of people, yeah, they're kind of constantly seeking for some kind of salve for themselves.
Yes.
And going externally. And that's like a very Western culture thing versus kind of going internally. And at the end of the myth, God turns Narcissus into a flower, not as a curse, but kind of as a, like, you need to be soft, because the rigidity of an obsession with a specific outcome is basically like death. You know, if you think of a leaf that's dead, it's very brittle, it's very rigid. But life is about being soft and pliable and kind of going with the movement of these changes. So I think it's kind of like a beautiful remedy for what we're all going through. And it's kind of cathartic too, with some of the climate change stuff that I was thinking about also, like on top of all the just humanity stuff, just this feeling of, you know, returning to nature and becoming something soft enough to handle some kind of cataclysmic moment that we all kind of feel strangely closer to than ever before. So yeah, there's a lot of layers to the meaning of it, but invoking God on my part, I think I still have like a little God-shaped hole like within my soul, having been raised that way, and it didn't feel like I was invoking a Christian God or like, you know, a Catholic God. It just kind of felt like, you know, generally this idea of like a higher power. But it did feel ballsy to use the word, and it felt good. But I think it's one of those things now where like we're all kind of over it. Like nobody needs to shy away from the concept of God, because the alternative, I think, accidentally in our culture, when we kind of basically, you know, wiped out religion as being like a good thing, is consumer capitalism kind of became low key the new religion, you know. Which I don't think is a really great spiritual practice. So there's a lot of stuff baked into why I chose to use the word.
Yeah, no, and I appreciate that. And I appreciate you answering it with some candor, because I know that must be a difficult, again, I think the narrative around you is you were raised one way and came to reject it. Is that too banal, or is that accurate, would you say? Like you rejected some of that heightened religious and conservatism, I guess, in your childhood and your upbringing. Is that fair?
You know, yeah, like I think I rejected the dogmatic qualities of Christianity and kind of like the perversion of the church, which I think we can all agree the church has done some very oppressive, dark stuff. But it's almost like I don't want to throw the cat out with the bathwater. Like, or is it the baby with the bathwater?
The cats don't go in the bath. They don't tend to like the bathwater.
They don't like baths.
No,
okay, so it's
flee.
the baby in the bathwater.
Yeah, but the babies love it, and for some reason there's an expression about not throwing babies away. It's a very weird expression, so you were right to get it a bit muddled. Yeah, but I think that's kind of the sentiment, is like, yeah, we don't want to disregard the unseen or the invisible forces or things that are kind of beyond the scope of our understanding. Yeah.
I think they're also really important. And the concept of grace and salvation and unconditional love and all these things are really valuable for our psychology and coping with reality. And kind of post-religion, I did get really into Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell, who are more like scholars who studied myths and religion and the archetypes of them and kind of wove a tapestry of the connection and the thread that exists between them, and how that can actually be very meaningful, and like the disparate cultures that kind of came up with their own version of a very similar concept. And so it's like you shouldn't throw the archetype away.
Yeah.
You shouldn't throw the story away, but it's like, unfortunately, the damage that has been done in the name of God makes it kind of embarrassing for people, I think.
Well, I think it's fascinating that you suggested that in the absence of religion, the new and I assume most people view it as a false god, is consumer capitalism. Like, that's fascinating in itself, because again, within the context of this record, I think you're making several allusions to some of the things we've already been talking about, the way they relate to themselves and other people using technology. And there's a narrative that's emerged that blames the technology, that blames, there was a very notable documentary about the damage of the true damage that social media is doing on generations of people, really. But I wonder what you make of the fact that these things wouldn't exist if the creators didn't think that we had something within us that they could tap into, some needs. Like, you invoke narcissists, and that's fair, and I appreciate your distinction between it. But do you think, the same way people tend to like look to and put their faith in God or something just to get them through their day, and even if you're an atheist, there's probably some internal faith thing that you're just relying on to get you through each day. I think these days, in the absence of widespread and galvanized religious movements, it's very hard. This is why we're so fractured. But do you think it's weird that we continue to blame the entities that people are choosing to follow, as opposed to like, what's wrong with us? What's going on within us? Because I hear more of that introspection and exploration in these songs. Like, it's not me, it's everybody is an amazingly succinct way of capturing what we're going through right now. But do you think we're looking within enough, or looking at human behavior enough, or just blaming the very religion or social media as the reason everything's gone awry? Because do you know where I'm coming from? Like, that seems to generally be what happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think that's a really good point. It's like, and this kind of comes up a lot, I think now. There's like so much mental health stuff where it's like, you just got to get your mental health together. Like, you just got to learn how to communicate your emotions. And my friend calls it TEDcore, where it's like these TED Talks about how to deal with, your personality disorder. But It's like, at the same time, there's also these huge structural things happening with algorithms and the way that we're kind of communicating, that it's so artificial that how could you not have a personality disorder? So it's like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Like, and what's also very difficult is, because these things do kind of feed into our natural instincts, it's like we're all willingly participating in kind of the gridlocked carceral nature of the technology. Have you ever heard the term panopticon?
Yeah, I've heard it. Yes.
Yeah, it's like we're all like willingly being surveilled. Like, nobody is being like changed to this. This isn't going against our will. So it is more nuanced. And I think that's why it would involve more conversations to understand like the power. I don't think, kind of like nuclear power, I don't think we really understood in Silicon Valley, basically the vastness and the kind of power that comes with this kind of technology in combination, in tandem with our propensities as human beings. And that's kind of, the balance where everything seems to go awry, is kind of like, just feeling like this is almost like too powerful for who we really are and what we can really handle. Yeah. And that, I don't assume that everybody's a saint. And I actually don't believe that, people are benevolent from birth. I think that we maybe generally side towards benevolence, but I think there's also a darkness to humanity and like a seedy kind of underbelly that will always be there and exist. I guess the problem is, like, in terms of technology, just how to keep the technology biologically in line with the best outcome of our mental intelligence versus the worst. And I think right now it's just kind of leaning towards the worst outcome.
Yes.
And I do think that that's ignorance, It comes from like a lack of observation and a lack of really kind of looking at the reality of what we've created. I think people are overly positive, I think, about it.
Overly positive. Interesting. Because I feel like there's more pushback against these things. Where do you think that positivity that you allude to kind of emanates from?
I think it comes from the fact that it's so beneficial for people who are like trying to make money.
Right.
I would say everybody kind of does lip service to how negative it is, but there's no like mass movement or boycott or, most people are just kind of complicit. So as much as there is this pushback, I think that's kind of this new thing that people are realizing, how it's not great for mental health, how it's really bad for like teenagers and things like that. But I think in general, there's still this optimism with commerce about it, where it's like most companies are kind of shifting towards like really trying to tap into the Zoomer mentality and really trying to tap into, kind of riding the algorithms and riding the technology to make as much money as possible. And they're not turning away from it,
Yeah. Well, you invoke the Zoomer algorithms. And I also think that with all of the technology, there's this primacy of youth. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on young people. As you and I are speaking, your U.S. midterm results are still coming in, but there's been overwhelming evidence that what I guess is Gen Z came through for the Democratic Party and voted in large numbers. But you have a song here called, I wanted your thoughts on this because you have a song, I alluded to it earlier, Children of the Empire. Once again, I would like to recite some of this for the people listening. We tend to live long, that's why so many things go wrong. People selling the young blood, I guess that's the price you pay. Make desire, but no one wins. Won't the fire burn us in? Before we get a chance to love again, children understand that they pay for their sins, seize control of what they made. Before we all fade away, children of the empire want to change. I don't know if what I just read is connected to what I prefaced it with. Can you speak to the pressure that we're putting on young people to fix everything that the boomers have ruined? Because I feel a little bit of that in these lyrics. Am I way off base?
No, I think that's definitely in there. I think it's kind of like, it also stems from just this feeling of like, if we were put in that position, the context of the boomers, would we have done any different? Like, is this just the way humanity is, that they just got so lucky kind of surfing on the biggest wave of natural resources of all time that they just don't even have the headspace for the kind of future and reality that we're confronted with?
Yeah.
So I don't get angry at the boomers or blame them, but it is like, it's hard to have this realization that you might not be able to have the life your parents had, or you won't be able to give necessarily the life that you had as a kid to your children.
Yeah.
Because things have just shifted so dramatically. So I think that, there is kind of this feeling of like cleaning up a really big, crazy, messy party. But at the same time, it's like, maybe we would have thrown the same party, like, I don't know.
You're absolutely correct there. And you've invoked, like earlier, I was talking about how we blame the machines and we don't look inward, or we blame certain religious and orthodoxy and we don't look inward. And you invoked blame there too. There's a lot of blaming of other people for problems. And you're right, I think, to think like, well, what would we have done if in these times? I feel like that's a major component of the way we're living right now is just trying to find who's at fault at all times and not really thinking about the context. Is that swimming around in what you were just talking about?
Definitely, because I think, with the way that the 20th century and the 21st century have played out, it's like everything kind of shifts gears a little bit, even just stylistically or however which way, every 10 or now every 5 years almost. So it's like, there is this falsehood that like all the generations are somehow different, and they are. And there's definitely differences. I notice even with kids that are just like 2 or 3 years younger than me, which is crazy. Probably because I sided more with Gen Xers. I have an older brother and I always just sided with that generation by accident. But I think, I think when you put it into context, you kind of realize that like biologically, I don't think we've really changed that much. I do think we have changed a little bit. I think that, plastic and crazy food stuff has made, younger generations like not hormonally as like hardy as previous generations. Like I really deeply believe that. And I found out recently too that like testosterone has been going down 1% since 1980.
Yeah.
That's real. Like that's not like fake news. That's real. So it's like there are actual differences, but there at the same time, I just think that if you were born in a different time, you could have been the same person, and the same as a boomer or like a Gen Xer. Like, I think it's so much about the nature versus nurture. Like, nurture has such a big part of it,
Yeah.
and coming of age at this time, kind of millennials getting blamed for being helicopter children who are like overly sensitive. I mean, it might be because we might, as the youngest batch of kids and the boomers, like, nobody talks about the youngest really getting the short end of the stick, but they do get a weird end of the stick. It's like,
For sure.
I was kind of raised by other kids because I was the youngest kid. So I was kind of left with the older siblings and the weird cousins. And, I was treated, pretty weirdly, and I turned out kind of strange. And the whole time everybody was telling me, oh, the youngest is so spoiled, or like, you guys, you got all of our parents' attention. And, but at the same time, it's like, it wasn't necessarily, basically what I'm trying to say is there's like, for each generation, there's going to be reasons they are the way they are. And to say that millennials or Zoomers are like overly sensitive and lazy is just half of it. Like, that's a pretty keen observation. But if you look a little deeper, like, maybe they're actually just like depressed and disappointed and disillusioned,
Yeah.
and were told about a future that they would have that doesn't actually exist, or maybe they, watch too many movies, or I just think it comes from, not really understanding reality. Like, maybe we got the most false version of reality out of everybody or something.
Well, I can corroborate that as a parent of two children, 111, 17, I am starting to feel like the 7-year-old Ramona got the short shrift, and then the pandemic happened. Brief context. I'm from Ontario. My family and I are from Ontario, but my wife is from here in Edmonton, Alberta originally. And so we moved at the end of 2019, and my daughter was 5. And because of the pandemic and the movement, I think there's been a gap in reading, spelling, these sorts of things. And then I've also just thought about how I would read to my son. And so anyway, this is maybe a personal experience, but it does ring true what you're saying. Like, we kind of, I think subconsciously, that my son helped raise my daughter in a way. Like, that sounds crazy, but what I'm saying is she had someone to look up to closer to her age, and they just had us to look up to. So like I don't know what I'm getting at there. You do tend to follow the older siblings as a young person. That's what you're saying happened to you, I'm guessing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I kind of sided with them.
And they become little mini parents, like, somehow. I don't know I know that someone's going to roll their eyes at this, but they kind of do, right? Like little role models.
Yeah. And I mean, but it gets sketchy when like kids are teaching kids how to live, because it's like they don't know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I have one story because I feel like I keep alluding to stuff, and I should just say one story. Like, a good example would be, I was getting taken care of by all my cousins. I was maybe like 3 years old, and one of my cousins cut off all my hair and shoved it in my diaper.
Oh,
and I was like wandering around scratching my diaper until my uncle was like, "What is up?"
Well,
and he just looked in there and was like, "Whoa!" But yeah, that's like a good example of like, I was like the experiment that like let's experiment on the baby,
oh, man.
Like,
yeah, that doesn't sound. I mean, that sounds relatively benign, but also cruel, if I may say. No judgment. But
oh yeah, no. I think when you're the youngest, there's some bully vibes, no doubt.
Cousins are, if you don't have an older sibling, you have older cousins. Like, I've talked about this many times. Like, my older cousin, when I was like 5 or 6, played me a Beatles tape, played me Led Zeppelin, The Police, whatever it was in the early 80s. And that's why you and I are talking right now. Like, that is the thing that put me on this. Like, I was like, what is this Beatles band? And then read everything, watched everything, listened to every record, like a research kid, like from a young age, just like just voraciously wanting to learn things. And so all I'm getting at is your parents are fine. Everyone's parents are just fine. But you need an older cousin or a friend who can guide you into like what's cool, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah. It does. But then in the case of me being so overly influenced by my brother, who is 11 years older, I have difficulty relating to people my age, where they were more kind of raised on the internet. So they're like referencing things that happened on Tumblr like 10 years ago, and I have no idea what they're talking about. And then as soon as I get around people that are like 10 years older than me, it's like we're on the same page. And that is also like...
Okay, so you are weird. You're weird.
That's disorienting. Yeah.
You're a little weird.
I would say there's like a cutoff point too, where it's like, I think that, you know, with the internet, there's this weird cutoff point where it's like, you do reach this point where all of a sudden culture is just like exponentially shifted over into the internet zone.
Yeah.
And it's very different. It's like a paradigm shift.
Well, there's a Chuck Klosterman. Do you know that Chuck Klosterman fella?
I do not.
He's a kind of a pop culture writer guy. He writes these interesting books, and his last one was about the 90s. And he writes these essays, just like sort of like I say, goes deep into whatever he's interested in, music, movies. But he has this chapter about how, and I represent this generation. There's a generation that remembers what life was like before the internet and the advent of the internet. And so I am in that generation. Like the internet, let's safely say, came around 94, 95, I think. 1994, 1995. You were what? You were born in like 88? Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah. So you're not on the internet. I'm guessing, when it's first starting, but I remember distinctly my high school librarian being like, there's this new thing that I've installed, and he was showing me how to use the internet, and he liked me because I kind of took to it. I kind of enjoyed it. Anyway, all of my life experience is this A-B of before the internet, when we didn't really know everything at the push of a button, and now everyone says they know everything, and it's created like a kind of false intellectualism where everyone's just like an expert on everything. And I represent a generation that is this weird cyborg of like, I remember when you had to wait and learn and be patient about things, and now you don't really have that. And I think it's affected people's personalities. Like you're talking kind of in a I think a relatively benign way about just feeling like some people's pop culture references are different based on their interaction with the internet. But I would argue it has actually created, I bet our brains are evolving differently. You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah, no, I fully agree. And I do see too, like, as much as I, you know, kind of remember the very tail end of pre-internet stuff, I remember it really clearly because it was noticeably more chill.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just kind of felt like everything you discovered just felt so sacred. And like going into a record store and combing the new arrival section and finding a weird record and not knowing anything about it. Just there was so much mystery that it just seemed like everything was kind of magical, and you were on this like magical journey of discovery. And then when you could kind of Google stuff, you know, the beginning of the internet, there was this golden age where it was really fun and just like kind of nerds communicating. But I think really with the advent of social media, that's when it kind of really got into people's heads of like curating these personas. That's, I think, when it went downhill.
Yeah, but also the one thing I've cited recently is my mother and I have pretty strong memories, meaning the ability to remember things, I guess is the way to put it, not just memories. And so I was telling my son or somebody the other day, when I was a kid, I would have 20 phone numbers in my head of every friend. And I didn't have them. I might have had them written down in one place, but I just knew every phone number. Now I couldn't tell you my best friend's phone number. It's just, I tell my phone, and my kids do it too. They tell their devices. My daughter does it with the TV. There's a button on the remote, and you just say, put it on the Cartoon Network. And it just does it. They don't have to. My friends used to marvel at me. I used to know every single channel number. You know what I mean? Anyway, this is way too much about me. I just feel like our memories are also probably being impacted by this. Our ability to retain information, because we think we don't need to. I'll just take a photo of it, or I'll tell my phone to just bring it up, and I don't need to I'll Google it. I don't need to retain anything. Is that
Google Maps?
Do I sound like a nut?
No. And I think if you really want to get down with the level of sophistication that we are losing, I think it's most apparent when you like watch movies from the 30s and 40s and like kind of see the way that, you know, people talked. It's like generally everybody like their brain had to be pretty clever. It was a typographical culture.
Yes.
Everybody was reading, and it's a pretty noticeable difference.
Yeah. I was just reflecting upon some of the things we've been discussing, and it occurs to me, having never spoken with you before, Natalie, that you seem like a very thoughtful and research-oriented person. I don't mean to embarrass you with flattery, but do you have if we can agree upon that, and I'm also just thinking about songs of yours on this new record, like The Worst Is Done, for example, and we can expand upon this in a moment, just to get at what I'm getting at. But you seem like a very dialed in, I want to know what's going on kind of person. And if that's true, do you know where that kind of comes from for you to like read about stuff, learn things?
It's interesting because I always felt like I was maybe just given some extra emotional software or something. Like I just have extra feels, and I've always cried the world's tears or something. Like from a very young age, ever since I was a little girl, I just had this weird feelings about justice and like weird anti-authority vibes. Starting from like preschool, I was just like, if a teacher did something weird, I'd be like, well, that's not okay. Like I was always like trying to right some wrongs, and I have no idea where that came from, but it ended up turning into, just becoming a sponge and wanting to absorb as much information as possible about the world around me to really understand, why I felt so out of place being this like empathic person. So I don't know. Yeah, there's a mixture of just being born that way, and then having, I guess, being privileged enough to be born in America and kind of grow up, in a middle class situation.
Yeah.
And just kind of ferociously devour information.
This, again, the narrative about you and your upbringing is that it was religious, it was spiritual, it was a little strict. Do you have a memory of when that occurred to you, for better or for worse, I should say? Like, do you have a memory of when you either were most aware that your house was maybe different, what was going on in your house was a bit different than others, or that that maybe this is kind of bullshit? Like, do you have any memory of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was basically around puberty. I was like, I felt pangs of it before. Like, I always kind of felt a bit like an outsider.
Yeah.
But then I think when I hit puberty, I was really like, oh, no way. I'm not going to be able to make this work.
Yeah. Yeah. Because I would argue the same. My parents moved from India to Canada, but would just fervently suggest India was the best country in the world, and fervently suggest Hinduism was the way and the light. Oh, sorry, I think I've paraphrased another religion there.
Yeah, the way, the truth, and the light. Yeah,
and Hinduism is this, and you should marry an Indian woman. They didn't even say a person. They just. I think at some point, as a teenager, puberty, you start to be like, hang on a second. And then, like I said, in my own trajectory, it was teens, 20s, most of my 30s being like, I know the oppositional force in my life is still that, and I'm still pushing against that until finally, like I say, I'm starting to soften finally. Do you reckon that the way you were raised thought you, in a bizarre way, brought you to a place where you thought more critically because of what you were being asked to swallow and accept?
For sure. I mean, if you have to denounce something that's like the culture of your household and the way you're raised, then you got to think really critically, because you're kind of stepping out of a very safe zone.
Yeah.
And going out and exploring something completely independent. And it was almost like I had to become a little adult from a very young age, just feeling the philosophical kind of juxtaposition with my parents. And when you have to grow up that fast, I do think, you kind of become a little bit more street smart or something.
Yeah.
And it's funny to make this about Canada. I actually remember one of the big reasons I really questioned Christianity is I was such a huge fan of the Kids in the Hall.
Oh, yes, that's right.
And
yes.
I really loved Scott Thompson. And I was like, I think gay people are like closer to God. Like, I don't think it's an abomination. Like, this can't, like, that was actually the first big tip for me, was just like how homophobic the church was. I was like, this makes no sense. So
I have read this about you. I don't know if you know this. Of course, you probably don't. You don't know me at all. But I'm such a huge Kids in the Hall fan. And I had Kevin and Bruce and Scott have all been on this show three or four times each or something like that. Most recently, Dave and Kevin were on to talk about their Amazon series, but Scott and I have become friendly over the years, and he's been on a number of times. So I love him. I love him so much, and it means a lot. I remember reading this about you, and I was like, wow, of all the people, Scott and the Kids in the Hall was a sort of a game changer for you. Was it hard for you was it like contraband to get to watch Kids in the Hall in your house?
No, I think my mom knew. They were like my boy band. It was like versus NSYNC or Backstreet Boys. I was like, I love the Kids in the Hall, and I'd print out pictures of them and make collages. And my mom was like, oh yeah, they're cute. You know, like she knew what the deal was. But I mean, every once in a while she'd see a sketch and be like, that's not right. Or, you know, like they had some intense material, but like I would just tape off Comedy Central, and so I had VHS tapes of all the episodes I had captured on TV, and I would just watch it over and over again.
So you're a part of that. That's interesting, because that's where they learned, is that when Comedy Central started to repeat the show, it found a whole new audience, and then that's like well after they were kind of done. So you're a part of that crew. You're a part of the reason they sort of maintained activity. So thank you.
I'm the Comedy Central rerun crew.
Yes, I think that's happened with a few different shows. So that's amazing. Comedy, I get the sense that you're a clever writer, and like I said earlier, I do get the impression you're a very astute and thoughtful writer. I don't often hear a lot of comedy in your songs. I'm sure for you it's in there. Do you kind of church and state with your love of comedy and the serious nature of your music?
Yeah, I mean, I think the comedy kind of comes out in the videos and my personality. I'm actually like a pretty big ham, and I love comedy. But I think that's what's so funny about me is, you know, my music is very heavy and sad, and when people meet me, they realize I'm like, you know, kind of always cracking jokes, and they're usually kind of like dad jokes anyway. But
yeah,
I think it kind of comes from, like kind of the two forces being strangely aligned, where it's like dark comedy, I think is very, you know, brilliant commentary, especially the new Kids in the Hall. There's some sketches in the new Amazon series that are so on point.
Oh my God.
In terms of just dark comedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's really funny. And it was such a relief to see a show where I was like, yeah. Okay, great. Especially Mark McKinney. Some of the Mark McKinney sketches are so good. And that Dave Foley sketch where he's in the bomb shelter. Amazing.
Oh, yeah. The end of radio kind of. Sorry, it reminds me almost exactly of a song by the band Shellac, and I think of that as the end of radio sketch because of that. But yes, for those who haven't seen it, he's basically, the last man alive and still trying to do a radio broadcast, like a cheesy radio broadcast. Is that
yeah, with one song. Yeah,
with the roller skates song. I almost said roller blades. Yeah, sorry. I don't think she's singing about roller blades. There you go. No, that's great. I appreciate that. That the comedy is your real life. I get this sometimes where I'm like, I wish the really funny person would put it in their art. I have a friend who's a brilliant writer, but she will only write serious plays and serious sort of novel specs or whatever you want to call them. And I'm like, why don't you just make it funny? Like, you're so funny, and there's like a fear of revealing the not being taken seriously. Do you know where I'm coming from?
I do. I think people like their cultural commentators, and they like when people kind of stay in their lane. It's hard when everybody is, you know, a very complex, real, dynamic human.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that as well. Listen, look at me. I'm serious. I'm earnest, but I'm trying to laugh, right?
Yeah. Well, the format I think that you occupy is good for both.
Yes, I think so. I think you might be right. Now, I was alluding to this song, so I want to ask you about it. The Worst Is Done. I mean, I hear someone, throughout this record, I hear someone pondering existential stuff, which I can't help but imagine was informed and perhaps exacerbated by living through a pandemic. The Worst Is Done, to me, seems like maybe the most obvious song that captures this current time. There's one of the is this a bridge or I don't know what the heck this is, but they say the worst is done and it's time to go out, pick up from where we left off from. They say the worst is done and it's time to find out what we've all become. There's that that authority figure that I pick up on here, and that follows what we were talking about earlier. The worst is done. Would you say that's a reflection of this particular moment in your life and ours?
Yeah, definitely. I think there was kind of this idea of like, okay, pandemic's over, let's all go back to normal. But it's kind of like, I think the egg got cracked, and yeah, the cat is out of the bag. That's the cat one.
There you go. Now we've got it. The cat is out of the bag. The baby's in the bathwater. Yeah, I understand. Yeah.
So I think we're in a zone right now where it's like, we kind of know because of how globally intertwined we all are, if one thing goes wrong, we're kind of all going to hit. There's going to be like these expansions and these contractions of our society based on these big events.
Yeah.
And that's bad for the economy and our souls and all that.
But is that what given the way you think about things, all I see is denial, like cycles of denial, because this is hard. I'm not trying to suggest that this isn't hard, but what I mean by that is we now know that various things are going to get worse in the winter. Various viruses, COVID, flu. Here in Canada, we have this really severe respiratory virus now. Everything's getting more virulent and like just awful. And what happens, it seems to me, I don't know if you have this in the States, because I think it's just a complete free-for-all. They say in the summertime, we're getting rid of the masks. The mask mandates are gone. You can travel, you can do whatever you want. But like clockwork, some of us are like, but wait a minute, that's going to mean we don't have a good Christmas because everyone's going to be sick. If we just leave them on, we'll have a chance, and no one listens. I know there's fear in that denial. I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm speculating that you think what I think. Do you think it's denial? Why aren't we learning from anything?
I think that it kind of comes from like, if you look at other cultures that just wore masks all the time anyway, like in Asia and places where it's just more common, I think there's just more of a collective nature. And I think we come from a very individualistic kind of westernized thought process where people don't do things for each other.
Yes. Yes.
And I know that sounds really harsh, but it's kind of built into the culture.
Yes.
And I think if people are kind of more approaching it like, I don't mind if I get sick, I want to have my life, versus, oh, I don't want to make somebody else sick. It's like everybody's just kind of thinking of themselves first versus the whole. And I just think that's so deeply ingrained in the culture that it's hard to like reverse without there being a great polarization, which is what we've seen in America with this kind of very deep schism with the masked people and the non-masked people, where it's like, it's kind of diabolical.
Yeah. Yeah. It's impossible to coexist even, it seems.
Yeah. Exactly. It's like, I've had a mask on and been bullied, and I've gone into certain situations and felt a little awkward that I didn't wear my mask. You know, it's like, it's kind of all over the place. And I think it's just like, unfortunately, the sentiment of, you know, the culture being very individualistic and kind of wanting to pretend that it's just you kind of fighting for your piece of the pie versus everybody in it together. Yeah.
So as we ponder how these things inform this record, I think we've touched upon narcissism. We've touched upon existentialism. I suggested there was some autobiography here. I hear and read in your lyrics a lot of heartbreak. And then what we're talking about now, this lack of galvanization about just coexisting and living together. I mean, that's something those are some of the things I think are going on in this record. And I feel like you've corroborated that as we've spoken. How do you possibly come up with a way to soundtrack these things in a way that puts them across? It's such an ambitious sound that you've had for these last couple of records. Can you talk a little bit about why you're drawn to this? And I don't even want to characterize it. I'd like you to do it because I hate to apply a genre signifier and you're like, oh, every goddamn person says this. Can you talk a little bit about the sound that you seem to be the most comfortable in as Weyes Blood, and whether or not you see it shifting at some point? Can you talk about that for this particular batch of songs?
I kind of see it as like, I Tin Pan Alley, starting with like some of the greats. I love classical music and I love the evolution and the history of music. So when I go to write, I'm kind of writing, kind of taking bits and pieces from all different times. And I think that songwriters that did that really well, a lot of it was kind of in the 70s when they were kind of referencing really old stuff and really new stuff for the time. And so I think sometimes my stuff comes off maybe a little 70s because of that. But in reality, it's kind of more about being influenced by what they were influenced by.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think I try not to be nostalgic about it. Like I try not to be like a dead on retrified kind of archival version of something. I always want to put a new modern spin on it. But I do think that the nostalgia comes out just because of the emotional quality and how, songs kind of used to be written in such a way that it was kind of this melodic journey versus now where I think it's a little bit more about, kind of like a upbeat, repetitive loop.
Right. And do you anticipate changing this course in any way? Like for those of us who heard the work you did with Tim Heidecker, who I alluded to earlier on the fantastic record Fear of Death, that was different. Would you agree?
Yeah. I think that was way more low key. I'm so sorry. So I actually have another appointment.
Oh, okay. Is it possible for you? I'll put all this. You're on if it still exists, you're on Twitter. You have a website. I can link to all that stuff. If that's cool. And people should know this record's out on Sub Pop. If we can go out on a song from this wonderful new record, can you pick one for us and tell us why you chose it?
I choose Hearts Aglow because it's the title track and because it's about falling in love in a very, intense, uncertain time and how that can really be like a beacon of light in the darkness.
All right, let's hear that now. This is Hearts Aglow from Weyes Blood. Natalie, this was a tremendous pleasure and an honor for me. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I wish you the best of luck in the future. Thanks again.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was great.
Oh, hearts aglow, we don't know where we're going.
an unusually abrupt ending to a conversation, but yeah, Natalie had somewhere else to go, and that's fine. I didn't know we didn't have as much time as we thought. No one told me nothing. It's fine. It worked out. It was a good chat. I think I talked too much. That's okay. Sometimes that happens. It's a talk show. Maybe I talked too much. Anyway, I really want to thank Natalie Mering of Weyes Blood for appearing on this, the 733rd episode of Creative Control, which is part of the Entertainment One podcast network and is available wherever you get your podcasts. Now, if you can't find an episode that you've heard about and you're looking for it, or if you want to learn more about me and sign up for my monthly newsletter, please visit vishkhanna.com. You can also like Creative Control on Facebook. You can, as I'm speaking to you, you can continue to follow the show on Twitter at vishcreative, or you can follow me directly at vishkhanna. And you can also follow me on Instagram at vishkhanna, which apparently isn't going anywhere. That's probably still happening. Also, please visit patreon.com/creative control to make a flexible monthly donation to sustain this podcast. That is the primary source of revenue that I get for all of this work that goes into this show each and every week, sometimes twice a week, hopefully no more than that. And it's a lot of work, but I like doing it. And like a lot of musicians, we just, musicians, artists, we like doing the stuff we like doing. It is nice to get financial support. And that's, if you go to the Patreon, you become a patron supporter, it goes right to me, except for some kickback they get, but not that much. Now, $6 American or more a month grants you access to exclusive content. You get episodes a little bit earlier than everybody else. Sometimes I'd go OT with my current guests. Sometimes I dig into my archives and find audio that I think you might find interesting from my journalistic life that precedes this podcast. It's all there. And if you're interested in receiving a Creative Control t-shirt, just message me on Patreon and I'll get you one while supplies last. Again, patreon.com/creative control. Thanks again to the excellent Alberta record retailer Blackbird Music, which you can learn more about and order things right there on their website, blackbird.ca. Also want to thank Pizza Trocadero, The Bookshelf, and Planet Bean Coffee, respectively, in Guelph, Ontario, and Grandad's Donuts in Hamilton, Ontario, for their in-kind support for this show. Thanks, as always, to my dear friend Jim Guthrie, who I haven't spoken to in a little bit. I should probably call him. Maybe I'll do that after I finish saying this stuff. You can learn more about Jim at jimguthrie.org. And finally, thank you so much for listening to this episode with Weyes Blood. Natalie is clearly a brilliant person, much smarter than I am, and I was trying to hang in there, but she is brilliant. I hope you'll check out the new Weyes Blood record and subscribe to this podcast, follow it, tell your friends about it, spread the word, and all of that helps me and means a lot. So thank you. I will talk to you very soon. Be well. Bye for now.